Now, we talked about the first two, functionalism and conflict theory, are both macro perspectives. We talked about this before. It both determines what methodological research angle you take, whether it's surveys or interviews or things like that, but also what you focus on. If you're taking a macro perspective and you're looking at corporate culture, you want to not only look at a lot of different corporations, but you want to look at larger connections, both to the larger culture and the organizational culture itself. What rules were laid down by the organization? What type of atmosphere is created? What kind of industry? That type of stuff. Okay. Whereas microsociology takes, which is symbolic interactionism, we take slightly different tact on this. And again, I'll read this and add a little bit to it here. Unlike the structural functionalist and social conflict paradigms, the symbolic interactionist perspective takes a more micro-level orientation to social institutions. One of the reasons why this theoretical perspective was developed was to fill in the gaps, and I think I mentioned this last time, fill in the gaps that sort of left by functionalism and conflict theory and their overly macro perspective. Symbolic interactionism comes out of social psychology, where it looks at things like the impact of culture on people's personalities. It also looks at things like small group socialization. So, for example, symbolic interactionists would be interested, how do your parents teach you things? Do they do it by instruction? Do they do it by experience? What values do they teach you that are different than American culture? Or also stuff like this. And your book talked about this to a fair extent. To give you an example, on page 83 and 85, on page 83 specifically, this is one area where social symbolic interactions would be interested. Listen to this. This is the Asch experiment. And remember I told you, for the most part, sociologists do not conduct a lot of experiments because of the issues of the controlled environment actually harms the results. And there are serious issues with ethics if you do things like this, including the Milgram experiment, but which if we have time we'll look over that. The Asch experiment was an experiment to examine the impact of peer groups or peer individuals in small group situations. So what they did was they had a control group who was in on the experiment, or what we call confederates. They were sort of spies. They were scripted to act a certain way. And then they brought the subject in, who was unaware of what was going on, that these people, he was told that these people in the room, we were all here for the same reason, and it's just to answer some questions, and we just want to see how you react in groups. So what they did was, they gave him 3 lines. I'll read it here in a second. And they basically said, they asked the whole group, which one's the longest? And for the first couple experiments, the people gave the right answer. And then at some point, the three of the 4 people who were in on the experiment said, the shorter line is the longer line. And at first, the one person disagreed with that. But eventually, after a certain amount of time, the subject was giving an answer that he or she knew was wrong, but just to fit in. And people say, well, what's the big deal with that? That is a big deal. That means that being around the influence of others can make you violate not only your own personal ethical behavior and get you to do things you didn't normally want to, but also to distort reality to where you're deceiving yourself. So let me read this here and give you a better idea. But this is very much a symbolic interactionist approach. How influential are groups in our lives? To answer this, let's look first at conformity in the sense of going along with our peers. Our peers have no authority over us, only the influence that we allow. Imagine that you are taking a course in social psychology with Dr. Solomon Asch, and you have agreed to participate in an experiment. As you enter his laboratory, you see 7 chairs. 5 of them are already filled by students. You are given the 6th. Soon the 7th person arrives. Dr. Asch stands at the front of the room next to a covered easel. He explains that he will first show a large card with a vertical line on it, then another card with 3 vertical lines. Each of you is to tell him which of the 3 lines matches the line on the first card. Simple. Right? You see the diagram. Dr. Asch then uncovers the first card with the single line and the comparison card with the 3 lines. The correct answer is easy, for 2 of the lines are obviously wrong and 1 is exactly right. Each person in order states his or her answer out aloud. You all answer correctly. The second trial is just as easy, and you begin to wonder why you were there. Then on the third trial, something unexpected happens. Just as before, it is easy to tell which line matches. The first student, however, gives the wrong answer. The second student gives the same incorrect answer. So do the third and the fourth. By now you are wondering what is wrong. How will the person next to you answer? You can hardly believe him, and he too gives the same wrong answer. Then it is your turn, and you give what you know is the right answer. The seventh person also gives the same wrong answer. On the next trial, the same thing happens. You know that the choice of the other six is wrong. They are giving what to you are obviously wrong answers. You don't know what to think. Why aren't they seeing things the same way you are? Sometimes they do, but in 12 trials they don't. Something is seriously wrong, and you are no longer sure what to do. When the 18th trial is finished, you heave a sigh of relief. The experiment is finally over, and you are ready to bolt for the door. Dr. Och walks over to you with a big smile on his face and thanks you for participating in the experiment. He explains that you were the only real subject in the experiment. The other six were stooges. I paid them to give those answers. He says, now you feel real relief. Your eyes were playing tricks on you after all. What were the results? Och tested 50 people. This was in 1952. 1/3 gave in to the group half of the time. This should surprise people in 1952 that people were willing to. You do this now, and the subject will stand up and say, "You're all stupid, and I'm leaving." That's what I would do. I'd be like, unless they were paying me an honorarium, which they pay you like a fee to become in the experiment, I'd be like, I got better things to do, like stare at the grass and watch it grow. And sit around with a bunch of idiots who don't know how long lines are. And I think one of the things it speaks to is that because this was done in 1952, imagine what it would be like in 2012 if somebody pulled this. I'm telling you right now, that at least 90% of the people, especially in New York, would stand up and excoriate these people for being idiots. Whereas in 1952, it was much more unacceptable to go against the grain. No doubt about it. It was actually beyond dangerous to go against the grain. You could get thrown in jail or accused of a communist. All kinds of things. Okay? People didn't even let their hair grow below their collars back in the 1950s. I mean, if you looked even slightly out of sorts. That's what, and it took the beatniks, who were essentially kind of deadbeats and were into poetry and grew their hair long and the goatees and stuff and listened to jazz music and snapped their fingers instead of clapping and did drugs and all that other stuff at a time when those things weren't accepted, to kind of stick their tongue out or their middle finger at boring white society or mainstream society at the time and say, man, I'm not going along with you anymore. And eventually this turned into or became the impetus for what happened during the 1960s. But again, let me read the results. Providing what they knew to be wrong answers, another 2 out of 5, 40% gave wrong answers, but not as often. 1 out of 4 stuck to their guns and always gave the right answer. I don't know how I would do on this test if I knew nothing about it in advance, but I'd like to think I would be part of the 25%. You probably feel the same way about yourself. Now, on the other page, they also talk about the Milgram experiment. Anybody know what happened in the Milgram experiment? Some of you probably come across this in psychology.
It was when they had a Confederate sit in a chair and a door in.
He was actually behind behind a thing you couldn't see.
And there'd be a teacher and
a guy who's usually a scientist in a white coat.
And he'll ask questions, and if it was wrong, they would go like up volts. So but the guy was pretending that he was getting shocked by the volts.
Right. So and what did they find out?
And they just wanted to stop the experiment, but the person was like, no, we can't stop the experiment.
And in the final analysis, so what was going on was they would invite a subject in and let him sit down at this thing that had all that they would say, all right, all we need you to do is ask questions of this person behind the screen. And the person, like she was saying, was in on the experiment. So they weren't actually getting shocked. But the subject was told by a scientist that was in the same room with them that every time they get a wrong answer, I want you to shock this subject. And with each additional wrong answer, it would go up, I think it was 25, 50 volts, which, if you know anything about electricity, 220 can kill you. You ever been shocked by the washing machine or the dryer? Man. Okay? You ever just been shocked by a 110 outlet, which is like the plugs here, right? It's easy, and sometimes it feels like it's sucking you in, like electricity like pulls on you or something. It's not a good feeling, okay? And it makes your whole body, to get electrocuted, it makes your whole body vibrate. It is bizarre. It like sets it off like a bell. It's really strange. And so, and once you get past 220, 250, 300, you're killing somebody. Okay, slowly. And the subject was told, I don't care what, no matter what you hear on the other side, keep shocking them. And the people on the other side, because they were acting, they probably got paid. They probably were actors too, the theater department. They were going, "Stop, please! I can't stand it! Oh God, you're killing me!" Like that. And the subject would turn to the experimenter, to the scientist, and go, "I'm not going to kill this guy. Are you taking responsibility for it?" And the responsibility is mine. Continue with the experiment. And they found that 50% of the subjects were willing to shock people to the death because they got wrong questions because some scientist told them to. And one of the reasons why Milgram did this experiment was, after World War II, there was a great debate about, is German culture and Germans, are they just evil? Are they just militant? Is this just something in their culture? Or are all human beings capable of becoming Nazis if the precise circumstances present themselves? And I think pretty clearly that Milgram's experiment proves that people put in pressure situations, in certain situations, will make the wrong decisions. Repeatedly. And harm people. At the request of other people. And you can make the analogy to the concentration camps. Right? Hey, the guards were just doing their job. And people say, well, they could have stood up. What would have been the consequence? They would have been the ones who got the shock, right? They'd be like, "Oh, you don't like this? Get in the oven." Seriously. Now, a lot of people criticize the German people and say, that's not a good enough excuse. Some people say, you should have chose death over engaging in this behavior. But I think it's very difficult for anybody to tell somebody else what they should decide in their life when it comes down to getting killed. You're going to tell somebody else, don't make that decision? And if you refuse to act that way, you're going to get killed? That I should act that way? You know, there's a lot of people during World War II that acted all uppity and moral. And in reality, were doing quite devious things, or were collaborating with the Nazis and all kinds of stuff. But your own president, Franklin Roosevelt, refused to let Jewish people immigrate to the United States in the early parts of the war because he didn't like Jewish people. I'm serious. I'm not making this up. Alright? I mean, it's sad, but it's true. You know, in the United States, here's another thing. The United States, especially during 1943 and 44, knew that people were being dragged off to death camps and trains. They did nothing to bomb the trains. They didn't bomb the tracks. They didn't bomb the stations. They didn't bomb the concentration camps. They didn't, when they liberated the concentration, they didn't even tell the soldiers on the ground that, hey, when you get into Western Europe, you're gonna, or when you get into Germany, you're gonna find this and that and this. Okay. And they knew. They knew as early as 1937 that Hitler was putting people in concentration camps. There were stories out of the BBC about this. So again, it's easy here now in 2012 to point down your finger at people in Germany and go, "You damn scums. You should have stood up and taken your medicine and gotten killed like everybody else." It's easy to say that when you're not in the middle of it, isn't it? And a lot of these people had kids and families, and a lot of them felt, man, if we can just get through this war and get Hitler out of power, things will be better. But again, you could also criticize them for being insensitive. People were suffering and dying right in front of their eyes, at their hands. And that's what Milgram was talking about. So there's an example of a symbolic interaction as perspective to an extent, okay? Certainly from an experimental viewpoint. So again, back to the slideshow here. Symbolic interactionism sees society as a product of everyday interactions, not just large cultural forces, not just large social institutions, rules, laws, concepts, and ideologies. That each one of us, like for example, I think I made this point to everybody last time. Each one of you knows what that word freedom means, right? I guarantee you, if I asked every single one of you to describe freedom to me, that even though there would be a lot of similarities, each one of you would interpret this differently. And that's what symbolic interactionists want to get at. How do we as individuals interpret things in our own manner? How do we interpret things in small groups? You don't learn about American culture as 308 million people don't all learn American culture at the same time. You learn it in your family, in a small setting, with 4 or 5 people at the most. You learn it with your friends, with maybe 5 or 6 people, although with Facebook everybody's got 2,000 friends. And I would submit to you don't have 2,000 friends. And if you do, how the hell do you talk to all of them? I mean, a friend is somebody, to me, you talk to almost every day. So, anyway, but even when you go to school, how big are most elementary school classes where you're learning about like New York history and American history and stuff, and capitalist values? How big are most school classes? So you guys completely forgot everything you were in high school. Yeah, 20, maybe 40 at the most, right? Overcrowded schools, you might get 40 people. That's a very small group. It's not like the government doesn't go out and go, all right, everybody, here's your weekly education about American culture. Today we're going to talk about liberty. It doesn't happen that way, does it? So each of us, due to the specificity of our families and our own individual characteristics, things like race and gender and region of the country where you're from and what occupation your parents are and what career aspirations you have, you learn things similarly to everybody else, but in very specific circumstances that alter these concepts at least slightly and leads to very, especially in the United States where we take individualism very seriously, that words like freedom, liberty, capitalism, fairness, justice, these things mean completely different things to a lot of people. Justice to some people is getting back at people who've harmed them. Justice to other people is the exact opposite. You know? Like, I know I keep using this example. Take the O.J. Simpson case. Did everybody interpret that the same way? A lot of people thought that guy was guilty. A lot of people thought he was innocent. A lot of people thought justice had been done. Other people thought it was a complete injustice. How can that be? Right? It reminds me, maybe a good analogy is like personal taste and like fandom. Like if you're a fan of a celebrity or a singer or an athletic team, you know, a sports team, you have a complete, like if you're a Giants fan, you have a completely different perspective than a Patriots fan. Okay? You're still both football fans. You know what football is. You know what pass interference. There's another one as well. Think about something like pass interference, or even fouls during basketball, or how about this? Olympic judging at ice skating competitions, right? Most of the judges, they're right there within like maybe a half a point, but some of them see it differently, right? And many times, here's to show you that we don't get to decide. You can't go out in public and say that liberty means I can punch people in the face. Just like at an Olympic competition, if all the other judges gave the competitor a 9.2 and you give them a 5, what's going to happen to you? Are people going to agree with you? So it's back to the Och experiment, isn't it? And it's less clear. I think one of the problems with his experiment, he used something that was, well, I guess this actually does make it good, but I think he could have used a better, more subtle thing. It was pretty clear which line was wrong, right? Is it always clear in life and in concepts and in society which one's clear, which one's right, which one's wrong, which one's best? Right? I mean, I'm sure that, and I'm going to show you some X Games stuff. If you watch the Olympics, people get infuriated because somebody got a high score and somebody else didn't. Right? Whereas some of life is like a 100-yard dash. Is there any doubt, or a 100-meter dash? Is there any doubt who wins that? That's just who crosses the damn line first, right? That's a lot of life, though, right? Look, who's got more money than other people? I don't think that's up for debate. Bill Gates has got a lot more money than me. So there are some concepts that are widely agreed upon, what we call a consensus, which impact people's interpersonal behavior and their personality. And then there are much broader, more abstract things like freedom, liberty, capitalism, what America means to people, individualism, all this other stuff that we all interpret in different manners. One of the problems is here, what happens when you have 308 million people who view liberty in 308 different ways? What can potentially occur? And this certainly occurs with the abortion issue and gay marriage. What can occur when you have people interpreting things differently all throughout society? Like major concepts. Like, what happens when you have some people who define marriage as one thing and other people define marriage as another? What starts to happen? Tell me your name again.
Tom.
Go ahead.
People argue.
Right, and what happens? Political conflict ensues. Many times social unrest can occur. You know, in this country, most people middle-class people are pretty comfortable. So when they get into a debate about gay marriage, it doesn't turn into sticks and guns in the streets. In places like Egypt, when people get into arguments over concepts of what is democracy or not, blood gets spilled because the difference between who gets to be considered to be right and wrong is the difference between going to jail and not, or getting shot or not, or staying in power or not. Because Egypt is, you know, the size of the pie there is much smaller, so when a political party wins, they tend to go after the other political parties. Whereas in the United States, we don't believe in that type of behavior. You know, when Bush took over the White House after having lost the popular vote by 200,000, there were people actually that threw fruit at him, like rotten eggs and all kinds of stuff. But nobody suggested that or very few people, I would say nobody, suggested that we should overthrow the government, or that he should have been harmed or impeached or any of this stuff, right? You know, so our political system and the way we believe in it also prevents some of these things from happening. But again, when you don't have consensus about major issues in society, many times conflict can ensue, and serious conflict can ensue. That certainly was, I think, the case during Prohibition. There was a certain segment of the population that thought alcohol was morally wrong, and the other part of the population said, you know what, here's what it comes down to with something like alcohol. If let's say 10% of the people are abusive on alcohol, does that mean everybody has to suffer? Because if we went with that rule, would there be aspirin on the shelf? People kill themselves with aspirin. Is it my fault that somebody killed themselves with aspirin? People kill themselves with their car exhaust. So would you get rid of cars? So part of this also has to do with how people, what political power individuals and groups have within the system to define these concepts. So it's not just singular, it's not just individuals, it's groups, it's group concepts, and that's why this is so important. So to go on, life is made up of interactions, and humans use symbols, language, clothing, concepts, freedom, all this other stuff that people use to not only communicate to others how they see reality, but also to construct their own image of themselves and what they feel and what they think. And in America, I don't think there's very few things that people take more serious than the development of their personality. I mean, think about it. Right? In America, your personality is not just who you are, is it? Your personality leads into how much money you're going to make, whether you're not a dynamic person or you have a good personality. If you're a jerk in the United States, I was going to say you were in trouble, but if you hang out with Donald Trump, he probably promotes you to chief executive officer in charge of hiring and annoying people, or something like that. But in general, if you have a jerky personality, or you're an asswipe or something like that, you are not going to have friends. You're going to have a hard time getting married. You're going to have a hard time keeping a job. Not a lot of people are going to want to be around you. Now, if you live in an area like, for example, New York was voted the rudest city in America, I'm not sure I believe that, because I've been to other cities where it's like, my God, including Los Angeles, which, by the way, topped the list the last 3 years. Miami was number 2. Which I find funny, you think with the weather that good, that people would be jerks. You know, but anyway. But, for example, it's much more acceptable here to do things. You know, if somebody's having a conversation in the stairway, what will you do to them? Let me put it another way. What would the average New Yorker do to somebody having a conversation blocking the hallway?
Get out of the way.
Is it going to be, please, sir, get out of my way? Or what the hell are you people doing, having a conversation in the hallway? Shouldn't New Yorkers know better? One of the reasons why New Yorkers are that way is that, if you notice, if you go down, first of all, I don't think New Yorkers are really that much ruder, trust me. Maybe some of them are. And the problem is, the rudest people are always the ones who get the most attention. So it's people, you know, I would say this is what happens. On the streets of New York, you can't be in the way, can you? That is one of the worst things, is to be slow. In New York, my walking, it's hyper walking. It's and I'm passing people left and right. It's like a contest for me, because New Yorkers are some of the fastest walkers in the world. So to beat New Yorkers at walking is like beating Usain Bolt at running. It's like, yeah, look at it. It's like it's a sixth sense of pride that I can walk faster than these people. But New Yorkers, I have found, especially people who live in Manhattan, will naturally shift and slot and get out of your way, right? If you're standing in the hallway, not only are you not shifting and slotting out of the way, you're in the way. Your selfish conversation is blocking the whole... It's like when people rubberneck because somebody got pulled over to get a speeding ticket. You are making me late because you are stupid. If a car has exploded and there's bodies on the road, fine. Rubberneck all day then. I'll stop and take pictures. Okay? Don't rubberneck because somebody got pulled over by the police. I always love it when there's a police officer on the parkways, either one of them, and he's in front of a pack of cars. Every other car they'll do this. They'll get close and pull away, and nobody dares to go flying around the cop, because you know the lights are going to come right on, or at least that's the assumption. Most of the time it's not. That happened to me on the Southern. There was a cop in front of me from the SAG all the way to like Eagle Avenue or something, or wherever it was. Anyway, yeah, and everybody was going like this, and so I got in the far left lane. I was like, I'm getting out of here. I just went 80. I was like, come and get me, dude, if you want me.
What it is, if everyone's going 80, you can't stop.
Yeah, you can't stop 20 cars.
Yeah.
But he can stop one, and you don't want to be that one.
No, you don't want to be the last one.
Yeah, you can't go into court and go like, dude, everybody else is speeding. You know, it's like being in a nightclub and a brawl breaks out, and you punch somebody. You can't just say, well, everybody was punching everybody. You still violated the law. So anyway, but again, why these things? And also, that's a perfect example. I think we use that as an example of norms. Through my experience of driving on the streets, I know personally that the police, I shouldn't say this in front of the camera, will not pull you over for 65 to 70. I'm telling you right now, I have blown past them doing 75. Period. Not a second look. Now, they will pull people over. I actually had an incident where sometimes I see people fly by, and I'm doing 80, they're doing 110. I'm like, man, where are the cops when that guy... I was coming back from Ocean Avenue near the Verrazano on the belt going onto the southern state. You know how the belt is down there with those stupid bridges that suck your car sideways? A Corvette went flying past me at 110 miles an hour at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I was like, where's the damn cops? I get down the road a little ways. Guess what? I almost rolled down there like, yeah, you deserved it. You got what you deserved, buddy. If you drive around a Corvette, you're going to get pulled over. I'm telling you right now. So, with this in mind, society and reality are what people make of them, not just these large cultural ideas or social structures, or that you're part of a society that's larger than you. This latter point earmarks a critical tenet of interactionism, that realities and societies are created or socially constructed by individuals and groups of individuals interacting. So what is required for these constructions? At one level, there needs to be some sense of shared meaning, either whether it's language or a belief system or religion or a set of ideas like liberty and justice. So ideologies do play a role in this. Therefore, like structural functionalism, symbolic interactionism embraces the idea of consensus. Excuse me. However, sense of social construction of symbols can vary dramatically among individuals and groups. Symbolic interactionism also acknowledges variation and conflict, which functionalists have a hard time dealing with, because functionalists view society as it's sort of imposing its will on you instead of you actively engaged in this give and take, right? Like, for example, society can tell you, hey, capitalism is a good thing, and you should believe in it. Does that mean you're going to believe in it? Let me put it this way. When you go into the presidential booth, there's more than just Democrats and Republicans on the ballot. There's communist parties and socialist parties. Like, for example, are you allowed to be a communist in the United States? Legally? Yeah. Is that what society teaches you, though? Hell no! So you're taking a decidedly deviant stance just by accepting this ideology. Now, you're not going to get anywhere, although Bernie Sanders, who is a senator from Vermont, is a socialist, and he's in the Senate. So again, even though that functionalists would say, if you grew up in a capitalist society, you're going to be capitalist. Symbolic interactionists would say, whoa, 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 not so quick. What about if your family is communist? And they override the social value system by teaching you something different. And they say something like this. Capitalists want you to believe this because this and this and this. And we're the vanguard of the new age. And so now it's because of the Soviet Union, it's a little questionable if that's the case. But again, right? You also have people that challenge things like the government, like in the United States, we have a separation of church and state, right? A lot of people challenge that. They say, hey, look, man, we need a religious leader in office, right? That's not what most Americans think. Although, let me tell you this, let me ask you this. Do you think the United States is ever going to vote for an atheist to be president? Not anytime soon. They actually have done studies that said that it would be more likely, more people would support a gay president and a communist than an atheist. Which is stupid because most communists are atheists. So anyway, but that's, if anybody's, any homosexual candidate comes up, they're going to get at least 12%, and they'll at least do better than communists. All right, go ahead. The social construction of reality is important in understanding how institutions behave. Symbolic interactionists view institutions as being made up of the collective interactions of the human elements instead of the formal rules and procedures and goals of an institution. For example, functionalists, when they would examine a corporation, one of the things they would do is, what are the rules of the company? They'd get the handbook, and in the videos they'd show you, they'd ask employees, what do you think about the rules? Symbolic interactionists would take a slightly different view. They would want to know what the rules are, but then they would ask this question. How many of these rules are actually followed? Right? Like, I'll give you my example from fast food restaurants. There's how things are supposed to be done at a fast food restaurant, and then there's how the stuff really gets done. Okay? Anybody ever worked in a situation like this where there were rules, but they weren't really followed? What kind of was it a business?
Yeah, kind of roofing.
So were there just rules about safety and stuff, or?
Yeah.
What about anybody who lives in the dorms? There's rules in the dorms, right? Do they bust you every time you do something wrong? Like, what's the penalty for getting caught underage drinking? Why do you keep looking at her? Is she alright? You an RA?
No,
You live in the dorms.
She dorms.
Does anybody ever? Have you seen anybody get caught for underage drinking? Did they get thrown out?
No.
Isn't that the rule?
Yeah.
See, they're supposed to actually technically go to jail, right? They're supposed to be fined. Do they even write them a ticket? Do they make them go to a drug alcohol thing? No. What if they get caught smoking weed, which is against the law? Against the law. And at Stony Brook, you can get caught. You can get caught repeatedly for marijuana, and they just make you go through a drug class, which is a joke. It's like, don't do this, and this is what it does to you, blah, blah, blah. And the instructor's probably stoned while he's teaching it, right? Dude, don't smoke weed, man, unless you get it from somebody you know. Okay? Take it from me. Anyway, like Michael Phelps, he's my best friend. But, here, let me ask you a question. Here begs another question. Why in college situations is it much more acceptable to be drunk and violate the law or to smoke marijuana? Why is that much more acceptable? And why don't institutions want to act on that more aggressively? So there's two elements here. What are the expectations of college years? I know that this is Malloy and it's not. Think Florida State. What's it like to go to Florida State on the weekends? It's party all day long. And on top of it, you know what's great about going to Florida State? Daytona Beach is right down the street. You just go down Route 4, man, you're there like that. And that's party all day. And I'll tell you the little secret about spring break. You know who shows up besides college students? High school students. I think there's probably sometimes more high school students there than college students. Okay? Why doesn't the college act more aggressively to get rid of people who are? You think, look, if one guy's underage drinking, he's going to teach it to everybody else. If one guy's smoking weed, he's probably selling it to other people. Why doesn't the institution want to kick people out of the dorms? What's in it for them? Right? You start kicking people out of school, now you're losing not only dorm money, and do they make you buy a meal plan? You're losing tuition money too, right? And then maybe somebody will complain to their parents, and now it'll get in the newspaper that Malloy kicked me out because I was smoking a joint with my friends in the dorm. And maybe people in Long Island will be like, come on, it's college. You ever seen Dazed and Confused or Animal House or anything? Come on! Or How High? And kids were smoking weed and scoring high on the SATs. You know? They were actually sprinkling the ashes of one of their friends on the joint, and he was giving them answers to. If you've never seen it, who's in it? Who's it? Redman? Yeah, right. It's actually quite fun. I remember I switched it on. It was just on the channel. I was like, what the hell is this?
They put it in the plan. Not the joint.
Right. It was odd though. It's an odd movie though. But nobody came out. No parents group came out and said this is the worst movie ever. And no movie theater said, you know what? I don't know. I don't want to be identified with this type of behavior.
It's funny.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But it's an illegal act, and you wouldn't make a movie about cocaine like that, would you?
Yeah.
Yeah, they already made movies about cocaine too.
But they're usually tragedies, like Blow or Traffic. They're not good, or like Train Spotting. Hard drugs are viewed as very negative, usually. Things don't turn out well, like Blow. The guy goes to jail when he promised to meet his daughter.
Yeah, but that's like the good. Actually, no, it's like a good ending.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, at one point, usually at one, like Scarface, he's wealthy, he's powerful, but then people come to kill him.
Yeah.
What about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
Although his mind was shot at the end of that. I would say there is one movie that shows weed somewhat in a bad light too. Friday, which shows that you can get involved with people who are trying to kill you, and Pineapple Express, which again is where people are trying to kill you. Right? Anyway, I don't want to get into observing. Seth Rogen is twisted. You know, if this was like, if if he was evaluated by a psychiatrist, he'd probably be put into a mental institute. I mean, the guy out of control. I mean, you've seen the Observer Report. It's bizarre. Now, the last sort of perspective here is postmodernism, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but since it's not in the book, I don't want to go over too much, but when you get a chance, read the rest of this. But postmodernity, which is not well recognized by sociology, it's a term actually used by a lot of different disciplines, art, cultural, and social theorists, to describe the impact of the changing nature of the modern world. That the world has become, things move quicker than they ever have before. People are busier than they ever have before. The world's population is spinning out of control. Institutions are losing their legitimacy. Postmodernists very much take sort of a social chaos theory, or social complexity view of the world, that social institutions only pretend to have control. And what postmodernists is more of a predictive theory that says, look, you know what's going to happen in the future? It's just going to be chaos. Things are going to spin out of control. It's going to be like Mad Max. There's nothing you can do about it. And then as we go along, governments are going to get more corrupt. Corporations are going to continue to be more abusive. They see the world as being somewhat abusive. It's somewhat similar to a conflict theory perspective. But like I said, I'm not going to test you on it, and we're not going to talk a lot about it, but I think it's important to put that on there so you guys are well aware of it. There will be certain areas where we talk about it a little bit more. All right. Now, since we didn't have time, now obviously today's chapter was about formal organization and groups. We'll get to that a little bit more. We will especially talk about, today talk about, since we didn't get a chance last time, to talk about culture and some of the ideas surrounding culture. We are also going to talk about subcultures, and I'm going to give you an example of a subculture that is starting to move into the mainstream, and that is winter extreme sports, which is called the X Games. The X Games started out as a bunch of kids and young people who were into snowboarding. It's similar to like skateboarding. When I was a kid, you would see stickers, or you'd see signs around that say no skateboarding. You still see this somewhat. And you would see stickers stuck on those signs that said skateboarding is not a crime. Because it technically sort of was. And skateboarding and snowboarding started out as an underground sort of, not a cult, but like a subculture, where they had their own language, they had their own ideas of what success was, or what was cool, what was interesting. My friend Jeff, who was a skateboarder from the time he was very young, and this was when Tony Hawk was, nobody even knew him, right? Everybody know who Tony Hawk is? All right. Anybody know who Shaun White is? See, now these people are household names. When I was a kid, the only skateboarding news you can get out of little alternative magazines, like Skating World and stuff like skateboarding and stuff like that. To give you an example of how subcultures act and how people inside subcultures define their realities differently, my friend Jeff would hold up his fingers, and he was proud of the fact that he'd broken every single one of them at least 3 times. His fingers were all jagged. He looked like he had arthritis. But this was a sign of honor to him that he had worked so hard to learn these tricks. And I'll tell you right now, and when I show you the snowboarding stuff, the danger for these snowboarders, they make stuff look real easy. And even I sort of delusionally for a moment sit there and go, wow, I could probably do that. And that's sort of what they want you to believe, because the X Games want you to go out and buy a snowboard or skis or something like that. But it's dangerous because, first of all, these people probably have killed themselves to get to the point where they can land these tricks. And even the best of them still get hurt. Shaun White smacked his face on the side of the super pipe in 2010 and almost killed himself. Sarah Burke, who they dedicated this X Games to, died from her injuries. She was 30 years old. You know? And there wasn't a single competitor at X Games that said, man, I'm thinking about not doing this no more. I don't want to get killed like Sarah. No, it was like, Sarah's a champ, she's a warrior, she went out there and she risked everything. Some people say it's not worth it. But inside of a subculture, injuries get defined as a sort of a badge of honor. Wherein the rest of the people would never get on a snowmobile and do a backflip, let alone 2, and then wreck, and then get back up and get back on it. You know? Most people, you know, they say if you fall off a horse, get back on it. A lot of people are like, I'm not getting back on that horse. Okay? Maybe Christopher Reeve should have said that. Anyway, poor guy. You go for a horse ride and become paralyzed from the neck down. And he tried to kill himself several. He was so depressed he tried to kill him. I mean, this is the Man of Steel. This is the guy who played Superman. He could barely eat and feed himself. You know? And people say, you know, I love horses to death, but they are dangerous animals. If you've ever been around them, man, I'm telling you right now, they'll kick you if you get behind them. They have bad like rear vision, so you can't. If you come at them from behind, they'll get scared. You got to come at them from the side usually. I'm serious. And they get, some of them are real skittery and they get scared and they're kind of crazy. But most of them are pretty good. And I'm absolutely convinced that they don't like people riding on their back. Absolutely convinced of that fact. And I'd be the crazy guy at the stable. I'd have a horse that I never ride. They'd be like, well, are you going to get on it? I'm like, no. I'm letting this horse live a real life. I don't know, maybe they like it if you're under 200 pounds, but I can't suspect they're real happy with the New York Giants defensive line gets on top. You know, Justin Tuck gets on a horse. The horse is like, dude, can I ride you for an hour or so? Can't throw you off then. So culture, according to Henselin, in his book Essentials of Sociology, is defined as a myriad of things, including language, which is, culture is embedded in. If you read that one part, you'll see that. For example, Eskimos or Inupiat people, they have like 20-some words for snow. There are some languages that don't have words for past, present, and future. Like, take the English language. We don't have a word, what's that one thing that the Germans say? Schadenfreude. Anybody know what that means? We don't have an English word for this. The Germans have a word for this. It's actually, it's being happy at the failure of others. It's like joyful shame or something. Like being happy that someone fell down the stairs because you don't like them. Like, and leave it to the Germans to make up a word for that, right? You know, and if you look at, English language, it's hard to translate into Chinese language and stuff. And how we define things in our language is many times how we see it, right? For example, in America, we say stuff like this: I spend time with people. Like it's money. We equate time with money in our society, in our language. Other societies don't do that. For example, in a lot of Native American language, they didn't have words to describe private property. So when the English people came and said, hey, we'll buy this, or the Dutch, we'll buy this island from you for a bunch of trinkets, they were like, well, we'll take your junk, but what the hell are you talking about? You own it. And so the Native Americans came back one day and they're like, what are you still doing here? They're like, we bought this place from you. They're like, what? You didn't buy nothing. What do you mean you bought something? What, you going to pick up land and put it in your pocket? It was a completely foreign concept for the most part. Native Americans didn't have this idea that you own land and then you could put a flag on it and say, damn it, this is mine, and I'm going to draw a line. That was a very European kind of, also Eastern cultural phenomenon. You draw a line. I mean, the Chinese got so crazy about it, they made a wall to keep the Mongols out. They're like, here, get over this thing. The Romans did it too. They were afraid of the Scots. I'm partly Celtic, so I'm proud of the fact that the Romans were afraid of these red-headed, Celt-wearing people. And the Celts back then drank the blood of their enemies. And the Romans, it scared the hell out of them. And they thought these people were monsters. That's why they were like, man, these people are nuts. We got to build a wall and keep these people out. Same with the Mongols. The Chinese were like, man, these people are nuts. Anyway. Also beliefs like our ideology systems, values, things like religious beliefs we have about ourselves or about the value of individuality, behaviors, how we act, from simple things like gestures, shaking hands, to things like how we react when we get attacked as a country, or how we react as individuals when we're embarrassed or shamed, or what shames us, these types of things. And even material objects that are passed from one generation to the next. And that's one of the key things. Culture is generally passed to one generation to the next. But if we look at the symbolic interactionist perspective, how would a symbolic interactionist explain, and if you don't know, it's okay, but I do want to ask this question, how would symbolic interactionists explain the fact that if your parents teach you the culture and the older generation teaches you about America, why don't you see it exactly the way they do it? They'll tell you what marriage is about or what it means, and you don't see it that way.
Because like you said, a social interaction is just like the interpretation. So it's like we never went through it, like we were just hearing about it. So
part of it has to do with differing experiences. Your parents lived in a different time when different things were happening, right?
Yeah, but you still like...
And they were taught by different parents.
Yeah.
Go ahead, sorry.
You still have your own views though. So.
And Americans take this stuff very seriously, that I have my own personal view. Like many times, many of you will go into the exact same career as your family. Many of you will deliberately not do that, right? And it all is, what does it depend upon? I think how seriously people take their own individuality, how much they respect their parents, how much they think that job fits for them. Whereas in the past, you were almost predetermined. Your dad's a farmer, you're going to be a farmer. No argument. You know, Will Rogers was that way. He didn't know what he wanted to do. His father was a big-time Cherokee delegate, actually, to the U.S. government from the Cherokee Nation. He was a well-known politician. He was wealthy. His son didn't want nothing to do with politics. So he started spinning ropes and telling jokes, and he became one of the world's best entertainers. But when he told his dad he wanted to go and be an actor, he was like, what? You know, like in the 20s, to say to somebody you want to be a professional actor, they're like, why? You want to be poor and get treated like dirt? Because, you know, there was no television. There was virtually no radio. There was very little outlets. You know, there was only so many positions in Broadway, and his dad thought he was crazy. Right? But he did it anyway. And you get a lot of pressure. Did you want to add something?
I was going to say the same thing, like how they're in a different generation.
So this is also not only how symbolic interactionism describes why culture is different from parent to child, but also explains much larger ideas of social change. This is how social change takes place, isn't it? Partly, at least this is one of the mechanisms. That how culture changes is that the younger generation is taught by the older generation. They experience things differently because they live in different times. Like, for example, I was in my late 20s when 9/11 happened. You were all probably in your elementary school or middle school years. It's a completely different experience. I experienced it as much as I remember everything from a political perspective and how it broke down and what was going on beforehand. And I read a lot of the newspaper articles that were analysis of what happened. You guys got impressions and images, right? And probably a lot of emotion too, right? A lot of fear, a lot of confusion. Has any of you went back and watched any of these documentaries? I'll tell you one you need to watch. 104 Minutes That Changed the World. It was raw footage shot that day. It's unbelievable. Anybody watch any of the documentaries on 9/11? Did it give you a different perspective? It reminds me of, if you ever watched a movie when you were a kid, especially if it's more of an adult movie, and then you watch it again, you notice a whole lot of stuff that you didn't notice before, right? Little comments, things that happen. Like when you're a kid, you know, like I'm telling you right now, how many people here watched Finding Nemo? How many people were under the age 18 when you watched it? Watch it again. I'm telling you right now. It will open your eyes completely. Right? Or if I watch Cinderella again, which, you know, say, well, what the hell are you watching Cinderella for? Because I'm examining it for the messages that it's teaching to young people. You don't notice some of these overt things when you're younger. Right? So we experience things at different developmental states. And also your mind and your personality is different, isn't it, when you're younger? It's less developed. You know less things. You're less experienced. Okay? And imagine also not just the age element, but I assure you, your view of 9/11 is much different if you were inside that building. Wasn't it? Or if you lost a loved one. Or, flip it on the other side. If you were Al-Qaeda, you were partying that day. Right? And I still don't understand why they got on Hank Williams Jr.'s case for celebrating bin Laden's death. I still don't. You know, and there's a perfect example of, that was his individual interpretation. He thought that was great. Scumbag guy. He was, yeah, you know, or other people were more like, how can you celebrate the death of somebody even if they were evil, right? I tell them this one thing. When they found out Hitler killed himself, there wasn't a person in America that cried. You ever seen the pictures of Times Square when they announced VE Day? People were kissing everybody, there's confetti everywhere, you know, I mean, good gosh. Okay? And then they want to try, and again, I didn't necessarily celebrate when bin Laden was dead, but you know what, if Hank Williams Jr. wants to act like that, that's his problem, not mine. The reason why it was important was he does Monday Night Football. He does that. Are you ready for some football? It's probably the only job he has now. He got into, the reason why he wears that beard, he got into an accident once. He's like,
Yeah, he rolled down a mountain.
so horribly, yeah. He's actually got a good, there's a good biography about him, film biography about him. So. I'm surprised he's made it. I mean, my stepdad listened to him when I was a kid.
Yeah, they were all
That's how old he is. He's like 60 years old or something. It's like Charlie Daniels. He's like 70.
Yeah, he's old. Willie Nelson's here.
Still playing the violin. Anyway, Henslin further breaks this down into material culture and non-material culture, with material culture being such things as jewelry, art, buildings, weapons, machines, and even eating utensils. This is what we think about as like culture, right? That culture in museums. Like when we think of Egyptian culture, you think of the pyramids, or you think of the tombs of the pharaohs, and you think of like the wall inscriptions and the things they've done. Or if we think about Greek culture, we think about the Parthenon, and we think about the Colosseum in Rome and all this other stuff. We think about these objects that people create. And when we think about America, we think about a lot of the things that Americans invent. Or you talk about Chevy, or Budweiser, things that or Coca-Cola, things that the rest of the world recognizes as American. These are some of the things that we are known for. What's funny about Coca-Cola is that it's one of the most recognized corporate symbols in the world, one of the most recognized American products in the world, and it's the first part of its name is an illegal drug, or at least a substance that's used to make an illegal drug, which was actually liquid cocaine was actually in Coca-Cola at one point. Believe it or not, and only Coca-Cola can get away with this. You know, on the back of a Coke can, the next time you see it, or a bottle, where it says natural flavors, you know what that is? That's de-alkalized coca leaves. They take the active principle out of it and leave the taste in. I'm not joking you. I thought it was a joke when somebody first told me this. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. They use de-alkalized coca leaves or what, some kind of artificial, or it says natural flavors, so it can't be synthesized. But again, it should surprise people because coca leaves are available in places like Bolivia because they're part of their culture. In the Incan culture, the coca leaf was a sign of royalty. People wore it on their belt. And they still use it as tea to this day. Yes, in the back.
Oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
All right. Maybe you remember it here in a second. Anyway, even things like machines, eating utensils. Think about it. I can, for the life of me, and I don't know, and I don't want anybody to show me, I cannot eat with chopsticks unless I just take the stick and stab stuff with it. Okay. And a lot of what, especially when Chinese food started to become, and sushi and stuff started to become more and more prevalent, a lot of people felt the way I did. It's like, I can't figure this out, right? I mean, because you're used to eating with a fork or a spoon. So, and I would assume that Chinese people or Asian people probably have similar issues with forks and spoons. Maybe not, I don't know. Chopsticks, just I can't get my hands right. Because I didn't grow up in that culture. Now, there's other people who grew up in America, they eat 5 pounds of rice with chopsticks and noodles and everything, not drop a thing. Okay? Even things like sushi, I can't stand it. I couldn't eat that unless you paid me. And even then I would probably have to have a bucket to throw up in. Raw fish to me is just nasty. Or take caviar, that's like an upper class thing. You ever smelled this crap? Ugh. Man, if that's what wealthy people think is a good food, I could sell them some some toilet water or some crap out of my trash or something like that. I mean, I could cut open a pig and sell you the inside of its intestines if that's what that's what kind of exotic food you're into. My God. Or truffles. Truffles are kind of disgusting.
You don't like truffles?
I don't like truffles.
I love truffles.
They're expensive. I'll tell you right now. You ever get a dog that can find you truffles, you'd be rich. Truffles are as expensive as they are one of the most expensive foods on the planet. Probably next to caviar. And supposedly you can use pigs to find them, but the pigs like to eat them when they find them. And you can get a dog. I'm telling you, people do this. People spend their whole life doing this stuff. And say, why is that important? That's a part of people's culture. In America, we don't take pigs out to look for truffles in the forest. They do that in Italy. People make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing this crazy stuff. Anyway. When you mix truffle with chocolate, it's different. There's not a lot of truffle in
That's what I thought we were
this.
talking
No.
about.
Truffles are little funguses they put in spaghetti and all kinds of stuff like that. And some people like them, some people, my God. It's a fungus that grows at the base of a pine tree and stuff like that. That's what it
My
is.
friend Johnny, he's really Italian. He has a jar of that stuff.
It's probably worth $10,000. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it's probably worth a lot.
I was talking about the chocolate truffle. Then you said fungus.
No, it's the fungus is what I'm talking about. The chocolate truffles are okay, although I don't like those little things wrapped in with a lid or whatever. I don't like those. If I'm going to eat chocolate, I'd rather just eat dark chocolate covered on almonds or something or pretzels, something like that. Anyway, so non-material culture, on the other hand, is a grouped way of thinking and acting, including language, gestures, and other forms of interactions. Non-material culture also includes things like social value systems and social mores based on tradition and history specific to each culture. Things like we celebrate holidays, or we have certain things that we honor. You know, when an important person dies, we lower the flags half-staff. Those are sort of customs and mores. We shake people's hands. One of the things that, in my American Society class, I had a young woman who was from Lebanon and she lived in Italy, and she actually thought that the tradition of Americans asking, "How are you?" was pretty cool. She thought that was interesting because they don't do that in Europe. It's just hi. You know, and I'll tell you right now, when I was in the Netherlands, nobody asked me how. I don't think anybody was interested. But having said that, they all did speak in English to me, especially when I went to McDonald's and stuff. But here's an example of differences. I went to the Burger King counter at the train station, and there was nobody else there. And the place was open, and had been open for an hour. And I stood at the counter for probably 7 minutes, I'm not kidding you, before even anybody looked at me. And I remember thinking my Americanness sort of took over, and I was like, what the hell's... In my head, I was going, what the hell's going on around here? This is disrespectful. And then the other part of me said, hold down, calm down. You are in another country. Don't start acting like an idiot. And they already probably had bad attitudes toward Americans anyway, or that were rude or obnoxious. And eventually, you know, somebody came up. You know, but again, in the Netherlands, people are not rushing around the streets and hurrying around everywhere. And I don't think they like the American attitude towards money either. That is just, Dutch people are much more interested in their free time and comfort than they are about having $1 billion. Most Europeans are that way. They're not really interested in being super rich. They're not. And their governments don't want to allow them. In Sweden, you can't really be a billionaire. They'll knock you down with taxes. I mean, their tax rates at the top level are, some of them, 50, 60%. In this country during World War II, it was 90% at the top level for a while. In addition, culture penetrates into our thinking, becoming a excuse me, taken for granted lens through which we see the world and obtain our perception of reality. Culture provides implicit instructions that tell us what we ought to do and how we ought to think. Culture provides a fundamental basis for decision making. Culture also provides a moral imperative, that is, the culture we internalize becomes the right way of doing things. And you can see how this can cause intercultural conflict. When I think I'm right and my religion is right and yours is wrong, I mean, there's only one, and you refuse to negotiate or change your mind, there's only one way to go after that, and that's conflict. Whether it's war or whether it's symbolic conflict or verbal or whatever. Okay? And the people in the Christians in the United States, or at least a majority of them, go around saying that they have no issue with Islam and Muslims. Do you actually believe that? Do you actually believe that Christians have no problem with Buddhists and Hindus? I'm telling you right now that a lot of Christians look at other religions going, you know what, this is awful stupid. Just get with Christianity and start worshiping the carpenter. Okay? I mean, what are you doing? Reincarnation, Vishnu, Buddha, Muhammad? Come on with that. Whereas out in public, people will go, yeah, I have no problem with that, right? And this, one of the examples of this is, how did the Christians treat the Native Americans once they refused to convert? Were they nice about it?
Kill them.
Basically, I mean, it was basically, all right, that's the attitude you're going to take. We're going to show you what's up, right? And it became, well, you know why these people don't want to convert to Christianity? Because they're just animals. That's what it became. And if they're animals, they're not people. And if they're not people, you can kill them and not feel bad about it. And I'll tell you right now, the first Puritan groups thought they were demons. You had people put paint on their face, jumping around fires, going like that. I mean, that was scaring the hell out of you. You get these uptight Puritans who didn't take their clothes off for anything. And these people were half naked with paint on their face, running around a fire, saying, here, smoke this. You know. And then the colonists were like, here, drink this. Like, yeah, that's good. Native Americans are like, here, take this brown plant back to Europe with you and hope it kills a lot of you for lung cancer. Anyway, there was a lot of back and forth going on. The Native Americans gave people syphilis, gave the colonists got syphilis, it got spread to Europe, and then we gave them smallpox. They gave us weed and most tobacco, but weed too, but tobacco, and then we gave them alcohol, and it didn't turn out well. I mean, you hear accounts of Europeans getting a hold of tobacco. It's like, wow, I've never had anything like this. It's the greatest thing ever. It relaxes you. It's great for energy. Like, they thought it was the greatest thing ever. And I'm sure Native Americans thought, wow, this alcohol, man, it's like nothing I've ever had, right? And you still to this day alcoholism on Native American reservations is a serious problem. Serious problem. Anyway, so that can be an area of conflict. Although the particulars of culture differ from one group of people to another, culture itself is universal. That is, all people have a culture. Okay? For society cannot exist without developing shared, learned ways of dealing with the challenges of life. Culture exists on many different levels, from the macro level, meaning large ideological systems like Christianity, capitalism, even the ideas of religion or ideas of freedom, ideas of meritocracy, all this stuff, democracy, guide the behavior of the entire society. In addition, each community inside of a society develops its own view of the larger culture. Like, are you telling, and this is a perfect example, so are you telling me that anybody would sit there and try to argue that people in Texas are the same as people in Vermont? I mean, you might as well. I mean, there's probably more similarities between Belgians and Dutch people than there are between people in Vermont and Texas. I can tell you that right now. But here's the thing. If Texas got attacked by terrorists, would Vermont be right with them? Right? We were with you, Texas. There'd probably be a few people in Vermont going, hey, that's what you get. Them cowboy hats. Although most Americans aren't that sick. Again, on 9/11, didn't regional differences go up in smoke for a while? People holding hands? You had the French president saying, I am an American. When's the last time you ever heard a French person, especially the president, say something like that? That's the quickest way to get unelected in France. Okay? Not that they dislike us, but they're proud of being French. You know, and they see Americans like, Americans, you have no culture. You bring a stupid Disney World here. Nobody goes to it. I think they closed it. Did they close Euro Disney down? It didn't go over very well. They don't like Disney in France. They call it the rat. It's the big rat. What?
It's still there.
Is it? Did you go there?
No, but my parents have a timeshare in Disney, so we
But
can
most
see information.
most people go to Euro Disney, or many of them are Americans. A lot of Germans like it, and British people like it, but the French cannot. But they put it outside of Paris. That's what drove French people crazy. That they put this hicky American pop culture crap outside of the greatest cultural city in the world with the Louvre and Mona Lisa's there and all this, and the Eiffel Tower. And you stick Mickey Mouse's dumbass in my city, you know? Whereas in New York, nobody cares you put an Apple store next to the MoMA. That's not a big deal. You can put an Apple store inside of MoMA. People are like, well, this is convenient. You can put a McDonald's inside there. And America does this stuff a lot. There's a McDonald's across from Tiananmen Square in China and Beijing. There's a McDonald's across from Red Square in Russia. And it was when communism was still there, they put this thing there. I'm telling you. So America likes to do this stuff. You put Coca-Cola signs all over South Korea. Anyway, culture exists, and then finally, on a personal level, each individual interprets culture in their own specific way. That's an interactionist perspective. This, in many ways, is what causes people to come in conflict with each other over cultural beliefs and values, even within one society, and even within one city or environment. Sorry, I'm trying to check what time it is. Now, these are some of the elements of American culture. Your book goes over these things. I didn't read this yet, did I? I think, look, there's a lot more than just this going on in American culture, but here are some of the dominant themes: individualism, democracy, and the meritocracy, which means that you earn things by being the best, not just by because your dad was the king or something, or your dad was President H.W. Bush. Anyway, number 3, capitalism is very important to America. There's no doubt about that, although it's more important for some people. Also, that America is a culture of extremes. We've got the X Games, and there's Extreme Gatorade, and let me tell you something. There is not a country on this earth, or at least that I know of, it might be Russia, that sells something like this as a drink for one person. If you showed that to somebody from like a poor country and around the world, they'd be like, what's that for, the entire village? In Europe, a large coffee is that big. I'm not kidding you. A can of Cokes were that big. And by the way, they use real sugar because they trade with Cuba. We don't trade with Cuba. So we use high fructose corn syrup. Pepsi actually put out Pepsi Retro or something like that over the holidays where they actually made it with real sugar. What was it called? Throwback. That's what it was. You're not going to see Coca-Cola do New Coke. You guys don't know that this happened before you were born. Coke changed their formula because Pepsi was beating their brains in, and it was an absolute disaster. I don't even think you can get it anymore. It tastes like Tab. which should be outlawed. Anyway, this is actually, if you click on this video, this is a video of people waiting in line for iPads. I'm talking about how crazy it is, right? Why would you wait in line for 5, 6, 7 hours for an iPad? I mean, you can just go next week and get one. I don't understand that behavior. But also just things, Americans love big homes, they love big cars, they love lots of cars, Americans love lots of land. In Europe, you're not going to have a 100-acre plantation in Europe. In Texas, if you don't have at least 100 acres, you're nobody. You know, seriously. Or at least in parts of the country, you know, like New Mexico. Having a 100-acre residence is not a big deal. When I was a kid, we rented a house that had 9 acres. It had 4 stories in it, because we had 4 kids, and it was expensive as hell to heat the damn thing. It still was only, get this should tell you, this was the 1980s, it was only $800 a month for rent, and it was a 4-story house. You can't get one studio apartment in Manhattan for less than $1,500, and there's cockroaches and rats crawling all over it. And they've been there longer than you, and they probably want to charge you rent. Like, dude, this is my home. Culture of thrift and efficiency and self-control, too. Some people save a lot of money. Other people are very uptight about things. There's a lot of diversity in American culture. But, having said that, you click on this article, this takes you to an article from the New York Times in 2005 that shows that Long Island is one of the most racially segregated areas in the entire country. It makes Alabama look diverse. Okay? And they used to bomb churches with kids in it. This has never been the bastion of the Klan. But I'll tell you right now, on my street, there's one Asian family and nothing else but white people. I don't even think there's a black people in that entire neighborhood. How many people here went to a school where it was mostly one race? 2 races, predominantly. Very diverse, 4 or 5. That's pretty good. Probably those of you who went to divorce schools, was it in Manhattan? Where was it at?
Suffolk County.
Really, where?
Well, Whitman High School.
Really? Where's that at?
South Huntington.
Oh, okay, it's in Huntington, yeah. Huntington's slightly diverse. But a place like Stony Brook, where the farther east you get, especially up on the Forks or up near the coast, 3-village school system. You know, go to Ward Melville High School. I doubt there's a lot of non-white people there. Anybody go to Ward Melville? Anybody go to Sachem? No? But you still see that, and part of this is not just, oh, I don't want to live next to somebody who's not my same race. When you go into a real estate office and you're white or you're black or Hispanic or Asian, you know where they put you? You think they're going to take a white person and put them in a black neighborhood, or take a black person and put them in a white neighborhood? No. And you have to specifically say, hey, don't put me in a predominantly white neighborhood. And the real estate agent would be like, why not? You know? What are you, some goofball? You know, I'd be like, look, it don't matter to me. I'd prefer to be in a diverse neighborhood to some extent. Prejudice and arrogance, that goes along with that. Freedom loving, but what does that mean? Materialistic, if you click on this, it talks about how materialistic Americans are, and this is a video, but read this here. This is from Labor Day 2004. It's Labor Day weekend and many Americans need a break. According to a recent national poll released by the Center for a New American Dream, Americans are overworked, overspent, and rethinking the American dream. At a time when Americans are divided politically, they seem to agree on one thing: we aren't focused on what really matters. More than 8 out of 10 Americans believe that society's priorities are out of whack. I wonder what the other 20%, they're probably doing well. The other 20% are the ones who are breaking the laws to make the other 80% think that everybody's out of control. The 20% includes Elliot Spitzer, John Edwards, and Donald Trump, and a whole bunch of other people that people don't like in general. And 93% agree that Americans are too focused on working and making money and not enough on family. We'll see this when we get to the time-buying book. Almost as many, more than 8 in 10, say they would be more satisfied with their life if they had less stress. Wouldn't anybody? The national survey reflects concerns over 2 related trends in American society: excessive consumerism coupled with economic insecurity. Meaning that people are spending too much money and not knowing if they're going to have a job next week. Which, can you see the contradiction? You'd think if you didn't think you were going to have a job next week or next month, you wouldn't be spending a lot of money. This is why we got into our debt crisis. All 3, the government, corporations, and individuals are in intense debt holes right now, with the federal government leading the way at owing over $15 trillion. $3 trillion to China, about $4 or $5 trillion to Great Britain, another 3 or 4 to Japan, and we owe the rest of it to ourselves, just about 7 or 8. So anyway. 80% believe that American society is too materialistic, but 4 in 5 Americans say that society is too focused on shopping and spending. At the same time, nearly 2/3 report the American dream is harder to achieve than it was even 10 years ago, and less than half of all Americans believe they will achieve the American dreams themselves. When asked why, 3 in 4 Americans cited debt, while 6 out of 10 said it's hard to make ends meet. How many people here think Americans are too materialistic? That's about everybody. How many people here think they're not too materialistic? The rest of you don't have an opinion. How's this? So that was about 70-80% of the class. How many people here, you are materialistic? At least you admit it. This is what I love. I'll tell you right now, if you ask this question, are there jerks on Long Island? Yep. Are you a jerk? Nope. There's jerks everywhere, but I can't find one to save my life. Isn't that bizarre? Why does that occur? That people are way more willing to say other people are materialistic than, except for you. Why did you want to say? Why did you want to admit that? You're just
I don't know.
honest.
Yeah.
What does that mean for you? Do you think this is a bad thing?
I don't know, could eventually be that.
So, the materialism, though, you're just saying that maybe you put a lot of weight on money or shopping. Is that what it is? You know, shopping. More consumer focused.
Like
What
when
about,
I'm upset, I go shopping. I just.
so maybe you should raise your hand.
I know, probably.
How many people here that you think other people see you as materialistic? It's the only one. Why are people unwilling to admit these things, even though they might be true? Why aren't people willing to admit they're jerks? It'd be a lot better society if people just admit they were jerks and change their behavior, especially out on the road, right? Yeah, you never have the guy who's following you, honking his horn and flashing his lights, or the other person. I love this situation. When you get somebody slow in front of you, and somebody tailgating behind you, and the guy tailgating you thinks it's your fault that we're going so slow, so he's honking his horn and flashing his lights, and then you're honking your horn and flashing lights, the other guy is going too slow, and eventually, people start getting out of their cars. Which I would advise people not to do that. You don't know what somebody's going to do. You go ahead and get out of your car. Stop in the middle of the road, pull your emergency brake, get out of the car, and walk up to the other person, and they're probably going to have a gun sticking like that, or a knife. Okay? Do you really want your head blown off because somebody's tailgating you? That's my friendly advice to Long Islanders. Stay in your car. I don't mind you honking and all of this stuff. Just, I'm telling you, don't think you're Rambo because somebody else might think they're Rambo too. And there's 2 Rambos who are not really Rambo killing each other in the middle of the streets while I'm taking pictures and putting it up on YouTube. Look at these idiots. And then they go, what, you making fun of us? Anyway, team up and kill me. But anyway, why is it that people don't want to admit these things? Why don't people want to admit that they're materialistic? You guys just said 80% of Americans are materialistic. There's 30 people in this room. That means about 24 of you are materialistic.
We have different interpretation of like society, like yourself.
Okay, so part of this is that maybe you aren't really materialistic. Or you don't see yourself as that. Maybe you think society is materialistic, but individuals are less so, right? That society tells people to be materialistic, and most people follow it just because it's what they think they should do instead of, I really believe in money and shopping. The other thing is, what does it have to do with the contradiction that can be created in your behavior? There is this theory of social desirability. That human beings, even Americans who claim they are individualistic and they'll get up in people's faces if you challenge them, that most people want to be considered to be socially desirable people. That you don't want to be a jerk. You don't want to be an asshole. You don't want to be materialistic. You don't want to be shallow. Remember that movie Shallow Hal?
It sucked.
Yeah, it was kind of bad. It made a good point, though.
Yeah, it's still.
Man, it's Jack Black. What do you want to do? At least Jason Alexander was in it. Gwyneth Paltrow. Anyway. But the idea here is that these are negative characteristics, and not only do we not want to admit these things to other people, because what happens if you admit you're materialistic?
Yeah, everyone else does that.
Right, you're going to, potentially, maybe your friends are not going to like you, or they might even go, why would you admit that? Right? It's like if you're a murderer, you don't go around telling people that. I'm not saying materialism is murder, but again, you don't go around admitting these things. Also, why don't people want to admit it to themselves that they're materialistic? Huh? Yeah, you don't want to see yourself that way, because if you see yourself that way, then you're almost labeling yourself, and you're creating a contradiction in yourself that you don't think you're that way, but you're acting that way, and it's creating this tension inside of you that you're not what you say you are, and in the final analysis, doesn't that make you a liar? That you're deceiving not only yourself but everybody else. Like if you're this is sort of a general rule. If you're lying to yourself, you're lying to everybody else, aren't you? Aren't you? If you're pretending to be somebody else because you actually believe it, you think you're Duke so-and-so and you're just a homeless person, you're lying to everybody you meet. If you're really a jerk and you act nice in front of people, you are lying, and you're even lying to yourself. And the worst part about it, the easiest lie to commit is the one you tell yourself, isn't it? Because you're the only one accountable for it. Isn't it? You lie to other people, they can catch you. You lie to yourself, you have to catch yourself in the lie. And it becomes like a self-perpetuating reality, right? And it's sort of this element of denial, I think is a good word. Anyway, here are some of the questions and issues with culture. We'll go over these. Next time we will start out with the subculture lecture. I want to show you some stuff from X Games. Okay? But the idea of the subculture is that it is a breakaway group from the main culture, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're oppositional. But I think the X Games is the excellent example of a subculture that not only formed, but then now is coming into the mainstream. Shaun White makes millions of dollars. How many people said they knew who Shaun White was? Raise your hand. See? How many other X Games athletes can you name? Who? Sarah?
No, like actually just
Who?
There's Louis Vito, there's
Right.
Odd.
Nate Holland. And his number, right? He won what, six, I think he's got 8. Something ridiculous like that. And here's the other thing. The X Games has impacted the Olympics. Shaun White's won an Olympic gold. There's been a lot of... Seth Westcott won a gold medal in the Olympics.
Some of them say they actually, like, to win the X Games, it's...
Well, the X Games means more because it's part of their subculture, where the Olympics, and we'll talk about this, the Olympics is sort of like the establishment. They're like the old crotchety institution that said, you don't have to do it this way. There's a lot of events in X Games that will never get into the Olympics, especially Winter X Games. Things that have to do, or especially in summer. Summer X Games use rally cars. They use BMX bikes. That's never going to get into the Olympics. Stuff like snowmobile racing. To show you, I think this is interesting. To show you how crazy these guys are. To show you the difference, since we are talking about culture, I do want to show you this before we leave. All right, here is Justin Hoyer on a snowmobile trying to do a double backflip, and he wrecks. So watch this. Where's the bottom?
You could tell, like, from the start he was going way too slow.
Yeah, it seemed like he wasn't sure what he was doing. But he was scared a little bit. Here's the volume.
A little bit of hesitation, not quite the pull off of the lip.
Ask yourself, would you do this?
If it's not ultimate.
And I guarantee he's going to get right back on the sled. Watch this.
Yeah,
That's a 450-pound machine. Watch his arm. Watch it. He tries to get back up.
It was a little bit,
Look at his arm.
Slow, and unfortunately the second
Totally
one,
like this.
it just wasn't.
And he falls down right there. And his wife and his dad were over on the side watching him. Watch.
And he knew. He knew it was coming down.
It could have been a lot worse.
Drove that right arm into the snow, and
Joe,
when
I
he
can
got up
update
there,
real quick.
he was indicating to his right arm, so...
Boy, he really was close.
He ain't crying though.
You know,
And he's
that's
probably
the
proud
part
that he tried it.
There's
Now, people say, well, why would you do such a thing? Why would you do such a thing and risk your life? Here's why you do. Heath Frisbee, on the other hand, right after this dude wrecked, right after this guy wrecked, he goes and does a front flip, which has never been done on a snow machine. Watch this. This is quite impressive. Can somebody get the light back there for me?
We pick our tricks early in the year, and I knew that a couple of guys were doing double flips, and I knew what they were capable of.
History is what it's all about here tonight. Snowmobile best.
These guys don't get paid $20 million a year.
A front flip's a wild card, but if I do it, there's nothing that's going to touch it.
And why is he going to do it? Because nobody else has. Watch this.
You
This
can't
is
ever
crazy.
say,
This is even crazier on some
no,
levels.
that's not possible.
Double back.
No, you can't do that. Anything is possible.
Come on, Heath. Yeah!
person in this class that would even attempt that. I wouldn't even go off the ramp. Just like jump off. I wouldn't even do that. And look at him now. Everybody loves him. He's great at that. And that was right after that dude broke his arm doing the double
It was
backflip.
just truly about achieving a goal.
And he even came up to me and like, aren't you scared to do this right? He's like,
I
no.
just wanted to come out and do
I'm
it.
gonna do it anyway. I don't pay attention to that.
Would be the first, besides Keith Frisbee, to do it
And he won a gold medal.
on a snowmobile. This is truly a breathtaking event for him.
No one can explain the feelings athletes get. When we go out there, it is the worst feeling in your stomach and your head, everything, and I just knew that I had to stay focused, and I knew that I trained for this, and I knew what to do. It's just crazy, because every year you have to step your game up, and you have to try something else, and you have to move to the next thing, and where does it go? Nobody knows. That's just, I guess I'm just gonna...
Alright. Let's leave it there. I want to come back to this later. I want to show you the wreck that Shaun White got into in 2010. He almost killed himself. And he still went back out there and won a gold medal after he busted his face to pieces. Alright, we'll continue with our culture thing. Here's the other one we're going to do on Thursday. So keep up with the readings and have a good day, and I'll see everybody later. Turn that light on for me, please. Anyway, again, that's our conflict theory's perspective. It's not my perspective. But again, the two methods by which this exploitation is done are through brute force economics, either by threatening violence or threatening to take away money, or also using the media that can persuade people. Earlier social conflict theorists argued that money is the mechanism which creates social disorder, and especially the differences in income inequality. The theory further states that society is created from ongoing social conflict between various groups. The only change that happens, like look, remember that SOPA bill? Remember the Stop Online Piracy bill? There was a bill in Congress to stop online piracy. It was put there, the entertainment industry wanted this passed. Right? Hollywood wanted this passed because they were getting their materials being stolen and uploaded illegally, and people were viewing it without paying for it. You know who was on the other side of that debate that stopped it? Google, Facebook, YouTube, okay, Microsoft, well, maybe not Microsoft, but other companies. So what you had was two groups of elites battling over the law. The law essentially got stopped. Do you think if the public would have been outraged, it would have been stopped? Maybe during an election year, right? Maybe. The politicians always love to pander to people during an election year, right? I almost think if it was legal, they would just hand out $100 bills and say, vote for me. I really think politicians would do something that slimy. I mean, they essentially do that anyway by like promising things like tax cuts. Isn't that almost the same thing as a form of bribery? I mean, can the United States afford tax cuts at $1.5 trillion deficits every year? I love this. They've cut taxes on rich people like 15 times over the past 30 years. They haven't raised the minimum wage more than like 3 times. Isn't that a little strange? Again, alright, we'll leave it at that. Next time we'll go over the culture article. Make sure to read chapter 3, which is the bureaucracy one, I believe. We will deal with both of those. That's actually social groups and formal organizations. We will deal with both of those at the same time next time on Tuesday. I won't be in my office, so if anybody needs to talk to me, let me know. I gotta run. I got some errands to do. Good thing is, this is my Friday.